In property, success is not measured in months, but over decades. It is built through cycles, relationships, and the courage to grab opportunity where others see uncertainty. Cities evolve over time, and behind that evolution are individuals who quietly shape the places where people live, work, and invest. Paul Barrow is one of those individuals. With nearly 30 years in property development, his work has helped shape some of Johannesburg's most important commercial and residential nodes. But beyond the buildings themselves, his story is one of relationships, discipline, and long-term thinking required to build a career that lasts. Today on Braadcast, we explore the realities of property development, the importance of networks, and what it takes to play the long game. Paul, thank you so much for joining us on Braadcast. It's an absolute honor and a privilege to have you here, and thank you for saying yes when we invited you. And it's good to see you here in person. You know, we've traveled a long way, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much for the opportunity, Norman. I'm excited to share our story with you.
Yeah, well, what an unbelievable story it is. You know, we've known each other for a number of years. We've done a couple of deals. And obviously your name's synonymous with property in South Africa, and what a proud name it is. But the beauty about it all is it didn't start overnight. It started more than 4 or 5 generations ago. And before we talk a bit about the Paul Barrow that I know and the market knows, let us share where it all began and just dig a little bit deeper into the generations and where it started, because the story is truly unbelievable. And for our viewers out there, it's a good listen, and I've read and I've understood, and it's been intriguing just to follow the legacy of the name. So can you take us back to where it actually all originally started?
Yeah, sure. It's an amazing story. And in anticipation of our chat, I've actually pulled out a book that was produced for our centenary in 1997 and read through it. And the book talks to the very beginning and how it all happened. So I'll take you through that.
Okay.
And it all started in 1895 when 2 young carpenters from Cheltenham, Gloucester, by the name of Jack and Albert Barrow, decided to come out to Johannesburg to see what all the talk was about. Gold had been discovered 8 or 9 years before that, and Johannesburg was abuzz with activity. Life was tough in Cheltenham, Gloucester for these 2 guys, and the 2 of them headed out in 1897, and they soon discovered that there was an abundance of opportunity in Johannesburg, and the gold rush was happening. And at the same time as the gold rush happening, a town and then a city was developing. And initially it was a campsite for speculators who came to Johannesburg looking to make money from gold. But that soon evolved into a town, and there was construction, building activity going on. So they spent a couple of years. They then called their father, John, who was left behind, and said to him, "You need to join us." And he came out.
How old were they at the time?
They would have been in their 20s.
Okay.
And John, I guess, must have been in his 50s, 60s. And he then came out to join the 2 of them, and they started John Barrow Construction.
And I mean, I did a bit of reading, and John had the name of John Honest Barrow.
Honest John.
Honest John.
Yeah.
Honest John. Yes. So tell us about. I mean, so it started there. They decided to, get involved in building, or actually was it just more into construction, in fixing up because I remember they did a lot with regards to the cement that we were responsible, and we have today. They were pioneers of the creation of that.
Yeah, it was building work. And their first job was a church in Langlaagte on the West Rand. That was their first big job. And I guess that got them going and got them on the map. But very soon thereafter, the Boer War broke out. And both Albert and Jack felt a sense of duty, and they went to fight in the Boer War. So they left their father behind. And it's amazing. There are letters that have been preserved and have been put into a book, which Jack and Albert sent back to their parents during the Boer War. And it talks to where they were, the skirmishes, the battles they were involved in. And sadly, Jack didn't make it back. He died, was killed in Senekal in the Free State, just before the end of the Boer War. So there was great sadness. And again, there's a letter that John sent back to his wife in the UK, and the wives were left behind. They didn't come out in those days. Oh. And it speaks to the distress and the sadness around losing Jack. But Albert came back, and between him and John, post the Boer War, there was a lot of activity, and they really got the business going. Families joined them from the UK, wives came out. And post-Boer War, Lord Milner was in charge.
I remember that name in history.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And he said, we now need to build Johannesburg in the British kind of way. Maybe that's a bit controversial, but that's the way he wanted to do it. And he brought out a famous architect from the UK by the name of Herbert Baker, who you would have heard of as well. And it was Herbert Baker's job to create buildings in Johannesburg along British lines in the tradition of how they developed in those days.
So that's amazing. So you basically, they were the first family that built and developed for Sir Herbert Baker.
Well, very, very quickly, Herbert Baker and John Barrow built up a relationship. And, you know, the early buildings that they would have done together would have been St. John's College, Raad,
where you went to.
Which is where we went to. So there's an amazing history there. And the fact that not only did Barrow build the initial St. John's buildings, they've built many buildings since then, speaks to the fact that there was a trust and there was a relationship that was built up. And repeat work is something that just carried on going. And, you know, I think it was a big positive, and it spoke to the quality of work that they created.
What's the most significant building that you can mention that weren't they involved in some universities?
So they built the bulk of Wits University. They did the Great Hall at Wits,
incredible,
which is an amazing building. And they also, around that time, you can imagine you had all those landlords, and the number of manor houses that were built on the Linksfield Ridge at that stage were numerous. And they did 18 of those manor houses, which were all Herbert Baker buildings, over a very short period of probably 10 years.
And, you know, we've been part of some of those sales over the years. You know, they've passed through different hands. But, you know, one thing they cannot do is develop or touch those, you know, the heritage of the Herbert Baker design. So it's a good thing. So you still go and drive past there and you can still see them standing. It's an amazing sight. So it's amazing they were being part of that whole development and construction. And then tell me, I mean, obviously, you know, the families start something, they create something, and over the years, I mean, they must have been over a good 20, 30 years that they were involved in. And you know, there's a saying that the first generation makes money, the second generation saves the money, and then the third generation, sometimes and often, not always, but they spend the money and then they waste the money. And the philosophy and the culture is flown through from the very beginning till through into you today. What was it built on? Is it just the way they were shaped? Was it just through the parents of their upbringing, or was it like a hardcore way of rule and order and discipline. Can you tell us a bit about the culture of the Barrow family and how it just carried on, continuing with this humility that the family have today?
Yeah, I guess a lot of it had to do with the industry that they were involved in. The construction industry is a tough industry, and
very.
You've got to work hard, and that's something that was always instilled from one generation to another. And there was the saying, "You're only as good as your last job," and there was pride in the work that was done, and relationships were valued. And it was, less about the profit that you were going to generate, as opposed to
what you were creating,
and finishing a job successfully, and having a happy client. And there's no doubt that kind of thread has run through from one generation to another.
Did all the Barrows come through into the business, or did some in the early stages do other things?
No, they didn't all go through. So, if you go from generation to generation, we've spoken about John Barrow, who was first generation.
Yeah.
There was then Jack and Albert. Albert was an amazing guy, and he did so much over the 30 or 40 years that he was in the business. His son John, who was my grandfather, he was at Parktown Boys High, and he left school at the age of 15, and he went straight into the business at the age of 15, and he learned his trade, and he was also.
I'd also leave Parktown High. I'm kidding.
Yeah, so it's interesting that he went to Parktown with the Barrows having built the St. John's. Yeah. You would have thought, fortunately, the next generation got it right.
Yeah.
So my dad and his brothers all went to St. John's. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then, obviously, one generation to another generation, and you were continually building. But there comes a time when, the Barrow Group it's big and growing and expanding, and you're going, you get educated, and you're expanding into different industry. But the core of the family remained in property until even this generation now. Your father was involved. And what made some of the Barrows move away from property?
Well, initially it was construction. And the property side of the business only started up in the early 80s.
Okay.
Chatting to my dad, he said that his father, John, was rooted in construction. That was his game. That's what he'd learned. And he didn't want to get involved in property.
Okay.
He didn't have an appetite for risk. He didn't want to borrow money.
Okay.
And it took a long time to persuade him that the business should get involved in property as well. In hindsight,
yes.
it was obvious that it was the way to go. Construction, as we've discussed, is tough. Margins are generally small. And the two actually work well together. And where we've benefited significantly is that the two industries go through cycles. And where construction's tough, property's doing better, and vice versa. Okay. And those cycles still play through at the moment. One thing that has become clear is we never took absolute advantage during good times, as others might have done. And we've probably been more steady. And
that's a common thread that everyone that's been on the show said they should have been more aggressive when things were doing well, and they should have bought more. So what you're saying is just a repeat of the other guests that have been on the show.
Yeah, and it's held us in good stead. And during down times, we've also kept on going. And we've kept on developing. And it's worked for us.
Yeah. So getting to Paul and your little journey. You went to St. John, we've mentioned that, and you went to university, and you graduated, you were a top sportsman in your field. You're not such a good golfer, but you're a good sportsman. You played for provincial, and your family obviously instilled those values of sport and competition and growth. But then your first job, talk us about your first job after graduating. I mean, did you know that you were going to end up in the Barrow construction, the family and property and construction? Did you know that from an early age, or did you have any other ideas of what you wanted to do and be?
Yeah, well, that's the obvious question which one's often asked. And the short answer is no. There was never a suggestion that I join the family business. And it evolved. And I spent time at Rhodes University and then a couple of years overseas. And when I came back, I remember my dad kindly arranging for me to go and see a number of people he knew who were successful business people. And I went and spoke to them and got their thoughts and ideas. And I didn't know that I was going to go into property. But something said to me, that's the place to be. And I didn't go straight into the business. I joined Standard Bank Property Finance. In those days, we sold participation bonds. In those days, interest rates, that would have been 1994, 95, were 25%. And I was involved.
It must have been easy to sell. If you learned in the hardest times, it can only get better.
Well, participation bonds were good for the investors, but for the borrowers, they weren't great. But there's a resilience about Johannesburg and South Africa, and I remember we did good business, but I learned a lot, and I learned about property. And you probably the same as me. Once you got into property, you got that feel, and you don't leave property. And I've often said to people, it's an industry that grabs you. And I don't know many people who've come into the industry and said, sure, this doesn't work for me. I want to go work in some other kind of industry. So I very quickly realized that property was for me. It resonated.
And the business at the time, the Barrow construction business at the time, or should I say the Barrow property business, because that only started in 1997, if I'm, or no, was it started in the 80s?
No, it started in the early 80s.
Okay,
so there's an interesting background to that as well.
Okay.
My dad and my uncle Dave were both very good squash players. They were both South African champions in their time, and they went on a Springbok squash tour to play in the World Champs in Australia, and that would have been in the late 60s. And they came back from that squash tour, and they found what they saw when they went over there was public squash courts were opening up all over the place. And they came back and they spoke to their father, and they said to their father, there's an opportunity for us here. We're a construction company. Let's start building squash centers, public squash centers. And you can imagine their father thought they were mad, but they persuaded him, and they started building public squash centers. And that was the first move out of pure construction. And over a very short period of time, they built over 100 squash courts, which would have been 10 to 12 squash centers.
You're saying public, but they owned them.
They owned them, but unlike clubs, anyone could go and play. And there were some very well-known centers. The one which was particularly well-known was the Hillbrow Squash Center. And there were 16 courts in the Hillbrow Squash Center, and that used to host world-class squash players. Jeff Hunt used to come out, who was probably the greatest squash player of all time, and used to host big tournaments. The centers were not just Johannesburg. They built centers in Cape Town and Durban. They even went as far afield as Israel, and there was a squash center built in Israel.
How ironic is it? And we'll jump forward just now in the conversation, but they were involved in squash and you're involved in paddle.
Well, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that, but I mean, wow, I only know one squash player besides you, Glenn Whitaker. my age who grew up went on to win multiple South African championships. I hope he watches this show.
He was a top player, and I remember as a 17 or 18-year-old playing this little 15-year-old whippersnapper, and he cleaned me up. So he was a top player.
So amazing. And so they built, they owned these properties, and then obviously they started to develop and grow. And in the early 90s, the property company was now on its way. Did you have anything significant in those days of properties or commercial properties developments?
Yeah, well, interesting. Just going back to the squash centers. So the bulk of them they didn't own. They had leases. The leases would be with municipalities or big institutions. And around the mid-80s, squash came under pressure from a demand point of view. I guess the market got saturated, and they then had to sell. And they were probably a little bit ahead of the market, and they saw this
writing on the wall.
They saw the writing on the wall, and they, over a period of 3 or 4 years, got out of all those centers and they sold them to other squash center operators. It was then that they started to move into commercial property, and the best known and first development they got involved in was Woodmead Office Park, and that was the first decentralized office park outside of the Johannesburg CBD. They teamed up with a doyen of the property industry, John Dewar, and they formed an association called Barrow Associates. And that piece of land in Woodmead, which we all know well as Woodmead Office Park, which is still there, and has stood the test of time, was their first big one.
Amazing. And those trees that are in the park, they are beautiful. It looks like it's been there a long time, and it obviously has.
Yeah, and that was what it was all about. It was a beautifully landscaped environment with water features. They were low-rise, single-story office buildings. The bulk in those days, it was only 0.2 or 0.25.
Incredible.
So it was, and with ample parking. One of the problems in Johannesburg CBD was that those office buildings didn't have parking. We never had the public transport system like you might have in other first world countries. Yes. And suddenly you were now in this decentralized environment with ample parking.
Incredible. And I mean, they didn't think about that at the time, about the parking issues. I mean, obviously, did they not envisage it growing and expanding so much? I mean, maybe at the time they would have planned a bit better.
Yeah, it's always easy in hindsight, isn't it? And you would have thought so. Yeah. But I guess if you look at first world cities around the world, they don't have parking and they rely on the public transport system.
Okay, so that was I wanted to know which was the first big commercial property that they developed. And then I think in the 1997, you joined.
Correct.
You joined. Yeah. And along the way, I mean, you must have been someone that you learned the most from. Who would that have been? And obviously you just finished your stint at the bank. You got a good understanding of finance and property. But then in property, you had to learn from someone that was there. Was that your dad?
Yeah, my dad was instrumental. He was a quiet sounding board, and he never forced his views or opinions on me, but I valued the advice that he gave me. And he, together with John Dewar, and there was another individual by the name of Olaf Holtong, the three of them.
I remember Olaf. He's still, I've dealt with him recently.
Yeah, he's still around. And they were amazing. And they brought me in. And they gave me latitude and they enabled me to go out there. But it was always with the knowledge that there was a safety net sitting behind. And that's
a good place to be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Tell me, your timing couldn't have been worse. 98, the interest rates went to 25%. So, I mean, it must have been a bit of challenges wanting to develop or own or buy and build at that particular time. So it
Look,
am I right? I mean, that was, as you arrived, the interest in the country, and there's a lot of turmoil going on.
Yeah, at the same time, there was an exodus out of the CBD, and there was a demand for decentralized office space. And one of the big things that we always did is we developed for sale or lease. So when we identified a parcel of land, that would be subdivided into individual urban, and it gave the market was broader. It wasn't just for lease, and albeit interest rates were still high, the idea of owning your own office building resonated with people. And they weren't big office buildings like we see now. They were low bulk buildings that probably varied from 600 to 1,000 square meters. The banks were obviously very happy to lend money in those days. And we used to roll on from building to building. So we would always be putting up a new building, and as soon as that got leased or sold, we would then start the next one.
And you're accumulating buildings now to build your portfolio. Did you have a short-term, medium-term, long-term plan? Was it always just you? I mean, you've obviously also sold in certain stages, but what was your original vision? Was it to build this massive portfolio, or was it to develop, build, trade, sell?
It was certainly not to build a massive portfolio.
Okay.
And I think that's been one of our successes. There used to, in those early days, there was a thought that you buy an office building and you hold it forever and it'll appreciate in value. What we've all learnt over the years is that there does come a point where office buildings, as opposed to appreciating, start depreciating, and they become less relevant. And timing in property is key. It's everything, isn't it? And we were fortunate that we sold at the right time. And in those days, the sales were either to owner-occupiers, or they were to property funds and institutions. Mm-hmm. In those days, the old mutuals, the Sanlums, were very eager to pick up income-producing assets. And a number of the buildings in the early days were sold to them. Subsequent to that, you saw the big listed funds coming in, and they had a strong appetite. They wanted to grow their portfolios, and we ended up doing a number of sales to the likes of Growth Point and Redefine.
That obviously gave you the latitude, flexibility to develop when you got a bit of a war chest behind you, because in the difficult times, I mean, again, in 2001, we see another interest rate hike and more challenges. You were developing, and everyone else was giving away properties. And then you've seen that cycle, and you carried on, and you expanded, and you even developed even more over the next years. I'm just saying, you just kept on turning. That's not the philosophy of a lot of property owners.
No, it isn't. Before my time, land was purchased, raw land was purchased, and that raw land had to be rezoned, which took a few years. But we always had stock of land in those early days, and we just followed a process and building one building at a time, going from one office park to another. We used to have 4 or 5 developments on the go at one time. So, some of the better known ones were, aside from Woodmead Office Park, was Thornhill Office Park in Midrand, Bedford View Office Park in Bedford View, Park Nickel.
Beautiful. Beautiful. One of the most beautiful developments in Bryanston, or even in Joburg, in Gauteng. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful.
It was. And a lot of the credit needs to go to, they were called Maross and Partners. They became M Architects. And they, over a long period of time, they designed over 150 office buildings for us. Now, that's an incredible number. No. And Ivan Schlapperberski, who was the lead architect for them, and with whom we still have a wonderful relationship, who's now 91, has just designed, and we're about to complete, a building with him and his partner John Martins in our Culross on Main office park. And that relationship goes back from Woodmead Office Park in the 80s to 2026 in Culross on
has
Main.
he kept up with the new trends and the styles and where the designs are going to? Obviously, he must have. You wouldn't be using him unless he has.
He has. He's an amazing guy, and to his credit, he's moved with the times. And you know, in the business, there's the argument that you just stick to what you're doing, stick to the same recipe, keep doing what you think is best. But we actually have evolved. Ivan has been very much part of that process of evolving. And you've got to adapt to change. And design of office buildings has changed dramatically over the years. So yeah, he has.
You talk about depreciating assets. I mean, obviously, of all the sectors, I mean, the office building can hurt you the most because there's the TI when a new tenant needs to come in there, and like you say, the designs have changed every 8 to 10 years. There's new ideas and new trends, and you know, I don't know. I would like to think that we follow the international trends, and we're not the leaders, but sometimes we are actually got beautiful designs, and we are the leaders in certain sectors. But I'm saying, as they change, those properties become obsolete. How have you dealt with that? If you haven't been able to sell it off before to an investor or to a tenant, what have you done with those buildings that you've realized, you know, they've reached the end of their cycle, we need to redo or refix or remodel these buildings because they could become a serious liability?
That's a great point. And over the last 8 or 9 years, the office market's been tough, particularly in Johannesburg. And where we've focused is around asset management, reinvesting in our buildings, and making them as relevant as we possibly can. And you've got to do that. You've got to keep reinvesting. You've got to keep improving. You've got to keep refurbishing. And you know, we still have relatively old office buildings, the likes of Park Nickel, and others. And I believe we've kept them relevant. And the other obviously critical aspect is that you look after your tenant, and you look after your tenant's requirements, and you build a relationship with your tenant. You understand their needs. How can we adapt to look after them? So that's why we've preserved value of these office buildings.
So just a lot of thoughts coming to my head, and like I said, this is not a pre-recorded, like we know what we're going to say. That's why I jump into my head. You obviously, during that time that you've got all these tenants looking after COVID, obviously was one of those times where you had to really work with your tenants and try and look after them and try and make sure that they didn't leave or just close. But then you've also had the other question I want to ask you is the shared office space, you know, which came in through another spanner in the works for people that just developed offices with single tenants. I mean, those must have been massive challenges for your business.
Well, interesting. You talk about shared office space. We joined that, and we created Bespoke by Barrow, and we've got 2 shared office space facilities, one at Oxford and Glenove, and another in our Waverley building. Waverley, you introduced to us. Yeah. You were the broker in those days, yeah. And we bought that from John Grieve. What's critical when it comes to shared office space is you don't create shared office space because you've got a failed office building. That doesn't work. You've got to put your shared office space into the best possible building, and then it's got a chance of working. Do you manage those as well, or do you outsource the management of the shared office space? No, we manage them ourselves, okay. And we've got a staff complement, and we've got great people who run those buildings, and we take pride in them. And even though your tenant is small, you might have someone who only takes one desk, one workstation. They're still important to us, and we actually see those facilities potentially as incubators to our bigger office park. And it's worked very well at Oxford and Glenhove, where we've got big office buildings, we've got big tenants, and it's part of the community, part of the environment. And
part of the relationship and the trust that you build between your clients. Because, I mean, I'm hearing you're working with them and you're doing work for people that you did 20, 30, 40 years ago, and tenants that have been with you for a long time, downscaling, upscaling, going into your new buildings. I would say the word that comes to mind is trust between you and your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it also, as you say, office requirements change. And if a business wants to downscale, within our ecosystem, we've got space for them.
In 2008, 2009, where that worldwide economic crisis, you bought a big property from me in Oxford Road, in Rosebank. I was actually shocked at the time because I thought, there's not a lot of deals happening. No one's developing. It's a crisis going on around us. And you had the guts and were brave enough to say, listen, we're going to go and buy this. And I don't think you had a tenant yet.
No, we didn't. And, we've always developed speculatively. Yeah. But that was just a wonderful location. Yeah. We bought that land from the Barrows at that stage, and they retained ownership of some of the land, and they came in with us initially. But what drove...
I must interrupt you there. There were a number of people looking at the site, and what they said to me at the time is, we trust Paul. We like who they are. We've known them for a while, and we want to do a deal with them.
Yeah, and I think the Barrows, they always said they didn't want to sell that land. If it was going to be sold, they wanted to be involved in the development. And we've always been used to JVs, and we've done many JVs over the years. Some of them have been done with the landowner, and they've brought the land into a JV. We've matched, their equity has been in the form of the land. We've matched that equity, and then we would have taken out borrowings for the balance, and that's worked. And I'm very proud to be able to say we've never had a JV which has gone sour, and we've never had a situation where a relationship has fallen apart.
Well, I can tell you the landscape of Rosebank has changed, but I don't think there's a more beautiful building. In that corner where you've developed, it's amazing, and you did a great job there, and everyone's very happy there. And I think you fully let. So I don't know what else, but I mean, it really is incredible, and I'm glad to have been part of it.
Absolutely, that was key. Yeah. We've got a lot to thank Light Architects for. They were the architects on the bulk of that scheme. Guy Steenekamp is a fantastic architect, and he's done a lot of work in Johannesburg. But what enabled us to trigger those developments was we got into sectional title offices at an early stage. And I remember we did Pinewood Office Park, which was on the northern side of the Johannesburg Country Club golf course, and it sat between the golf course and the N1 highway.
Not exactly.
And
alongside stroke one.
Alongside the par 5.
Is it the 5?
And stroke 1.
Stroke 1.
Yeah. And that was when I just as I joined the business. Yeah. And it was a huge piece of land. And I remember thinking to myself, how are we going to work our way through the development of this property? This is going to take us 15 years. Yeah. And at that stage in my life, 15 years was a lifetime. Yeah. And I remember going to a guy called Martin Evans, who you might have heard of, who was Bryden's and Bryprop, and we'd done some JV work with him. And I said, Martin, have you got any ideas as to how we can speed up this development? And he said, absolutely, get into sectional title offices. And at that stage, the other developers didn't really want to get involved in sectional title. They didn't need to. The conventional...
But I think, if I must interrupt, you went from the construction background as well. So coming from a construction background, the mindset is a little bit different to coming from a developer mindset, because they're to hold and wholly own the property. As a constructor, you don't mind selling off because you're actually building for someone and they're going to take a piece of it. So I can understand why the thinking was along those lines, why you were ahead of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've always said we're not going to develop to keep the building company busy. That's wrong. But it obviously was a positive for the construction company that we were feeding them work. And there was ongoing construction work taking place. But we got into sectional title offices when no one else was doing it, and we started on a small scale. I mentioned Pinewood Office Park, and we developed Pinewood Square within the park, which was a sectional title building. And we were developing units of between 60 and 150 square meters. That was our module. And again, we sold to investors or owner-occupiers, and we would roll on from one to another. And we did a number of sectional title office developments. A lot of them were in those office parks. But then the big break came. Melrose Arch was underway, and it's always been so impressive. And we got invited by Amdec, who at that stage were 100% owners of Melrose Arch, to develop a sectional title office building with them. And, that's there for all to see. It's just off Athol Oaklands. And we developed 1 and 3 Melrose Boulevard. And it was amazingly well received, that building. And people wanted to be part of Melrose Arch. And that opportunity hadn't existed. And to be able to own commercial property in Melrose Arch resonated with the market.
What was the most difficult period for you over the last 25 years? And was COVID it or not really?
Yeah, COVID was tough. I think it was about the uncertainty. We just didn't know what lay ahead. And we didn't know how long we were going to be stuck in that situation for. And I remember well working from home, speaking to our tenants. Big thing is communication. And I remember...
Did you have any casualties?
1 or 2.
Nothing serious?
Nothing serious. We've always been fortunate that we've had solid tenants. And we've always had the belief, don't just take the first tenant that puts an offer to you. The tenant needs to be of substance. They need to bring a covenant. And we've learned the hard lesson before.
So talk about your lessons that you've learned before. Tell us some of the bigger mistakes that you must have made. If anyone's been in business and they've grown and developing and expanding and taking on risks, they've made mistakes.
Yeah. So the first fundamental with property is location. You've got to pick the right locations. And we've made mistakes along the way. We've picked marginal locations.
Because the land was cheap, possibly.
Yeah, and that mustn't drive it. You must get the right location. And Oxford and Glenove is probably a good example. It could be argued we paid slightly over the top, but we got a great location, and that's going to hold you in good stead going forward. So, in terms of mistakes made, I've taken a lot of comfort from the fact that when we had the older generation in the business, being my dad and his 2 brothers, there were 8 of us. And the older generation were a sounding board. And they were, at that stage of their lives, probably more risk averse than we were. We were young, and we wanted to get out there, and we wanted to give it a stick, change the landscape. And they were a calming influence. And we've always met on a Monday lunchtime. That tradition has carried on for as long as I've been in the business. Okay. And if a decision was made by consensus at a Monday lunchtime meeting, great. If a decision wasn't made, well, then we'd wait till the following Monday and we'd talk about it again. And we would only commit to something if there was overall consensus that was the way to go.
Did you ever develop or build a building that you struggle to let?
Yeah, we have. And in more recent times, it's been even tougher. In the early days, they used to move quite quickly. But you've got to have patience. You've got to wait for the right tenant. And sometimes we've said that's not going to work for us, that tenant, and we must hold on. And I guess, we haven't geared aggressively, and we've been conservative from that point of view. And we haven't been an unlisted business. We're not accountable to third-party shareholders.
And you've never had the thought of partnering with a listed company and throwing all your assets into that and possibly enjoying the benefit of the REIT status?
We've done a lot of JVs with bigger companies, with listed businesses, with financial institutions, but we've never entertained the idea of listing. During the listing boom, there were approaches, and there was talk around us bringing our portfolio in and taking scrip on the back of that. And the feeling was always, we don't want to do that. We believe that we've got a quality office portfolio. We also like to be in control of our portfolio. We asset manage it, we property manage it, we're very hands-on. And if we were to have put our portfolio into a bigger portfolio, we would have lost an element of that control.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've done it. In hindsight, it's a science, and you've done it right.
We've got some right.
Yeah, you go. And tell me would you say your signature development is Glenhove in Oxford?
So we spoke about Melrose Arch,
okay,
and that was great.
Okay.
And that was done with Osmond Lang,
okay,
who'd done a lot of the Melrose work, and they were also excellent architects. But from there, our next big one was Catherine and West in Sandton. And again, that was a sectional title building. And that was done.
It still looks amazing.
It does.
I mean, it's way ahead of its time then, and today it stands out like it's brand new.
And that's another Guy Steenekamp building.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of excitement around the 2010 Soccer World Cup, and more importantly, around the Gautrain. And
how good a position is that today?
And there was a frenzy of buying in the immediate vicinity of the Gautrain, and particularly in Sandton, which was obviously the business capital. We made the decision we're going to go sectional title. And what we used to do is in discussion with the banks, we would pre-sell 50%, and on the back of that, the banks were comfortable that we get going, and they would lend us money. So we would have third-party owners in 50%, and then we were happy to retain and own the balance of the office space.
What made you decide to go and do residential developments? I mean, you were the kings of commercial buildings, and all your buildings are beautiful. And
yeah, that was probably 3 or 4 years later.
But the decision making to get involved into residential, never done residential. I'm not sure, but maybe you have touched on retail, but I don't think I know that you've been involved in retail. But certainly to move into residential, what would you just think that there was a demand and a need, or do you have the right property?
We'd done a fair amount of residential before then.
Okay.
And so we'd built up a knowledge base.
Okay.
Our first bigger residential was a development called Ipanema, which was on the corner of Oxford and 14th Avenue in Houghton. And it was interesting. We did that with Pete McKenzie. And just touching on Pete McKenzie, he's another example of a fantastic JV partner. And we've done over 10 JVs with him. And that speaks to Pete as just a solid guy.
What a guy!
Who we enjoy working with.
I sent him one of the podcasts, had a great response. What a great human being.
Yeah, and we're about to start another JV with him, which we're very excited about. But that Houghton development, council insisted that it be mixed use in the rezoning. their view was that on Oxford Road, you needed to see mixed use, and they wanted to see residential. And on the back of that, we had an office building, which was on the corner, and then on the neighboring property, we did the Ipanema apartment development. I think council envisaged, when they spoke about mixed use, they saw it as being part of the same building. But there were two properties, two stands, and we separated the two. And we were able to open a sectional title register over the residential property. So, the Ipanema was the first one. Metropolis on Park, that was about location. And we just saw this property that fronted on to a park. And, I suppose we had visions of Central Park, New York, Hyde Park in London.
But it's beautiful. I mean,
it is.
It's beautiful. I mean, if you go there, if anyone's been there, and if you go there, I remember I think I sold one of your penthouses, and I'm literally, because of where it was, the position, and I showed the buyer before he even committed, he basically hadn't seen it. He said, "I'll take it."
Yeah.
Because of the position.
Yeah. So it ticked that box.
Yeah.
Kent Gush, who's well known in the industry as well, him and Raquel were sold that on our behalf, and they did a very good job. We sold a big chunk of it up front even before we developed. That triggered the funding. We've ended up owning 50 of 126 apartments in that development. It wasn't by design, but we've become very hands-on. We're very involved in the body corporate. We sit as trustees. That's given comfort to other existing owners. And the building's in great shape at the moment. The vast majority of our tenants in the building are corporates, mainly expat corporates. And they bring a good covenant. And we've got many of those tenants have been there for a number of years.
Amazing. And I mean, your build conversion, you say that everyone's like doing these conversions now from commercial to residential. Have you dabbled with that idea, or not really?
We have tried our hand a little bit, and we got involved with Connie Besaidenout from SOM, who again you would know, and
yes.
we've done a conversion in Blairgowrie. What's interesting is very recently we've bought an existing office building. It's the first time we've ever done that. We bought the ex-Tiger Brands head office in Bryanston. Yeah.
Oh,
we've always been big fans of Bryanston. Yeah. Bryanston just resonates with us.
It's held its head up high through the most difficult times, especially through COVID. I mean, I can tell you the prices in Bryanston didn't see the decline as the surrounding areas like Rivonia, Morningside, and Sandton.
For sure. And we own a number of office buildings in Bryanston. And it draws from the immediate suburb of Bryanston. It draws from solid suburbs and neighborhoods. And we found a lot of the tenants in Bryanston have been South African owner-managed businesses. And we've been able to build up relationships with many of those tenants. And so Tiger Brands, we bought at a price that is at a substantial discount to its replacement value. And very difficult to make a new development work from a feasibility point of view. And we're very excited, and we're just taking it to market now. And we've had wonderful interest.
Did you do a renovation and fix it all up? Or?
The intention is to renovate and to put our stamp to it and to make it relevant. And when a prospective tenant comes to a building, it needs to resonate with them. And it's interesting, they'll make that decision very quickly. You can often see it in their eyes. As they walk in, they say, we can see ourselves living in this place. Or if they switch off, you've lost their interest very quickly.
But you bought that for position. I mean, it is absolutely ideally situated. It's on the main road, highly visible. And you're going to add your signature to it.
Yeah, and we've been fortunate. Tiger Brands have been amazing in the process. They've handed over a building that is 25 years old, but it is in immaculate condition. And they've looked after it incredibly. And you would know, often you get a second-hand office building and you walk in there and you shudder. But in this case, we've inherited something from them that's in great shape.
Well, I mean, like any building, but particularly commercial offices, they're a liability if they're not kept properly, because to get them into a state of being let is a costly exercise. I mean, we all know that. Tell me, you never got involved in trying to do retail?
We finished our first retail development recently. It was a JV with Pete McKenzie again, and it was in Plettenberg Bay. And we developed Robberg Bay Shopping Centre. For those who know Plettenberg Bay, it's at the end of Longships, just below Whale Rock.
There must have been an amazing development and timing couldn't have been better.
Yeah, it's been good. And big learning curve for us. We hadn't done retail before. It wasn't by design that we'd never done retail. I guess over the years, offices has been good for us. It's where our understanding sits. That's where the knowledge base is. And where opportunities have presented themselves, we've easily been able to make decisions around buying land for office development. But I'm optimistic that we'll be doing more retail on the back of this. We also, adjoining the retail site, is a residential estate, which we've developed called the Boardwalk. And that was 40 houses, which we've also recently successfully completed and sold out.
Sold out?
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. Well done. And something a bit more along the lines of your history of being involved in sport. I mean, you started dabbling in, you developed the paddle courts here by
Ethel
in
Gray.
Melrose. That's at Ethel Gray, in Melrose area. I mean, how did you get involved in that? What made you do that?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. You spoke about Glenn Whittaker. One of the other great old South African squash players is Craig Wapnick. Okay. And he's a great mate of mine. And one day we were chatting and he said, "Have you heard of the sport called paddle?" And I said to him, I've never heard of it. The funny thing is that's only about 4 years ago. Yeah. Paddle's only been here for 3 to 4 years. And there were 2 courts in Johannesburg out on the West Rand. And we went and had a game there. And, we just love ball sports and racket sports. And the 2 of us were hooked. And so we said, well, why don't we try build some paddle courts? At the same time, Steve Nicholson, who you would know at Country Club Johannesburg, and who's a visionary and has always been ahead of his time, he was looking at paddle. And we started chatting. And we ended up building the first paddle courts at Auckland Park. We had an amazing engineer, Craig Thompson, who designed the courts for us. And we've been one of the only paddle court builders that actually build the courts locally. All the others have been kits which have been imported and assembled. So we built our own courts, and it was good for Barrow construction. At that time, construction work was quiet, and it gave them a stream of work. The construction guys, it was easy work for them, and they were able to do it very quickly and very easily. So,
and how many have you done?
Well, my brother Roger, who's the only one from our generation who never joined the business. Roger became South African rowing coach, went to 4 Olympics, won a gold medal with his team in London in 2012. His time as a rowing coach had come to an end, and we were chatting, and he said he was looking for something to do. And I said, Rog, here's the perfect opportunity. So Craig Wapnick and I were non-executive. Roger came in, he ran the business, and we rolled out over a short period of time paddle centres at Country Club Auckland Park, Woodmead, Bryanston Country Club, Bryanston Sports Club, James and Ethel Gray. We developed a centre out at Broadacres, And so we did 6 or 7 wonders, of course, and it was great. And there was a steep learning curve, but we enjoyed it, and it resonated.
But it's changed communities. It's changed the way people live. It's changed a lot of things in our communities, locally and actually across the country. I mean, what you've done, and they're beautiful. I mean, James and Ethel is an amazing place. Just go and sit there and have a drink and play a bit of paddle. But, we're also very involved with paddle. I don't know if you know that we're the official sponsors of Paddle South Africa, the tournaments. We signed this year. So they've got some of the major tournaments, and I think they're all being played around. A lot of your courts will be played there. So we love sport, we love competition, and we love anything that makes people feel good. So what you've done is just an incredible close the circle of bringing communities together, and what an amazing thing. So I'm glad that a proper developer has done something that I'm sure will stand the test of time, and being 20, 30 years, they'll still be there, like the squash courts. You built something substantial, and it's been great for the community and for everyone. So well done.
Well, the two of us, we come from the same kind of background, don't you? We both love sport. Yeah. You've been, having been one of the top SA amateur golfers around, you know what it's about. And in my life, sport has brought so much to me. The interesting thing about paddle is it's such a social sport. And
absolutely. Anyone can play it.
Anyone can play it. And sport is about community and friends.
Absolutely.
And being able to do things together.
I might be a little bit of a worse loser than you.
Well, it's we've both learned in sport, you lose and most of the time. I played a lot of cricket. And how often do you come back from a cricket game and you failed? Yeah. And I guess a lot of those learnings one brings into business and into your own industry as well. And we're all going to fail, but it's learning from those mistakes and getting better.
So one of the things that I've learned from this little conversation is that, I'm not sure who said it, but it's very relevant for you in the Barrow Group and for what we've discussed. Someone once said, and I've read it recently, that you always overestimate what you can do in the short term, but you underestimate what you can do in the long run. So saying like you think that you can do something very quickly in a couple of months or a short space of time, you always overestimate. But what you've done, as the family have done over the years, I think you never envisaged it would be so substantial, and you've underestimated it. And it's proud. You can be proud, and a testament to how your great-great-great-grandfather shaped and brought the kids up and the family and kept them all together. Some of the other Barrows, your family, are not in property, but they're very successful. They've all, I've met a lot of them. I've met a number of them. Some of them have even operated on me.
Well, that's an interesting one. And people always say, which Barrow are you? Are you from the construction property Barrows, or are you a Dr. Barrow?
They're still construction.
And my answer to that is, well, the Dr. Barrows are the clever ones.
Yeah.
And another interesting thing is, with paddle coming about, they're the Barrows that have been building the paddle courts, and they're the Barrows that are then operating on everyone who suffers an injury playing on the paddle court. But they're great guys, and they're also part of the family. Yeah. Brian Barrow was my dad's first cousin, and then the next generation are all my second cousins. And
they all love golf as well.
They do love golf. Yeah. And my kids also been playing a lot of sport. We spend a lot of time in the doctor's rooms at Sunninghill.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the one thing that has stood out is the humility among such successful business people. And I must say this, and I'm giving you guys a compliment. It's just amazing. A lot of people that have built legacies and built businesses, they just sometimes they don't have the time to talk to the normal person, But your family, your name, and the way you've conducted yourselves and throughout the whole family and everyone that's been part of it has been amazing.
Well, I take a lot of comfort from working with my 4 cousins. There are 5 of us, and you do have your moments, you do have your issues, but being a team and being 5 of us, it for me is everything. You're not shouldering the responsibility yourself. You're making decisions jointly. You're bouncing ideas off them. You're getting their advice. And at the end of the day, it's been a team effort. And I'm lucky to have John, Colin, Donald and they've been predominantly on the construction side. And then my younger cousin Neil he's an accountant. He's our FD. He spans both the construction and property business. And Neil's really smart, and he's got a level head on him. And he's been instrumental in looking at diversification and looking at investing offshore. And he's driven our property investments offshore, which has given us that diversification that we needed.
Okay, so that's amazing. I mean, it's just what a wonderful story to have the family all still together. Give me one word that would describe the word Barrow that relates to define Barrow property development, Barrow construction. The name Barrow, what was the one philosophy that the whole family has stood by?
Sure. I guess it's reliability, it's honesty, consistency. Those are probably those were instilled in us at an early stage.
And if you had a message for a graduate, 23 years old, coming out of varsity, studied maybe accounting or property studies, or anyone that's interested in getting involved in property, whether it's construction or development and ownership, what would your message be to them?
Yeah, I've always, when people come and talk to me, I say to them, property is a wonderful industry to get involved in. And, your first job is not necessarily your last job. And get into the industry, learn what it's about, be prepared to learn from other people, take in as much as you can, be a sponge, ask questions. Your questions initially might be perceived to be stupid questions, but you're only going to learn from those questions. You're only going to learn from mistakes. And I would be confident that people who come in the industry, as we spoke about earlier, will stay in the industry.
Do you have any regrets looking back over the last 30 years?
I'm very fortunate that I haven't got too many. I'm very fortunate to have a wonderful family. I'm happily involved in our business, and I can't speak to any specific regrets. You might have regrets in terms of investment decisions you make, but you learn from them and you become better on the back of that.
And tell me the view for you based in Gauteng and the property where we are. What do you see? How do you see property playing in the next few years? Because I'm very firm believer that we've got through the bottom of the cycle. There's a lot of upside now. We're undervalued, like a good share. There's a lot of potential, a lot of possibility, opportunity. I'd love to hear your quick thought on that.
Yeah, I often talk about that. And we've been through tough times, as we discussed earlier, particularly in the office market, particularly in Joburg. But it's turned the corner. There's no doubt about that. It's funny. It's like a light switch. Middle of last year, you suddenly got that feeling, and there's a whole lot more positivity. And I'm confident in Johannesburg right now. I know that we've fallen behind, but there's going to be a lot of catch up. There's also catch up in the office market. There hasn't been new supply coming to market, and we suddenly seeing significant uplift in office rentals in your good quality office space. And
a lot of the space has been taken up from some of these properties that have been converted to residential. So it takes out the vacancy, it reduces the vacancy, and then all of a sudden you're looking for some space and you can't find it.
Yeah, so there's very little stock, and I think you're going to see the astute investors coming back into the office market very soon.
And your vision for Barrow Group going forward, anything in specific, or are you just going to carry on doing what you do best and develop and construct and build a portfolio?
We've never been a company big on strategy, and we've never thought too far ahead. But it's an obvious question. Will there be a sixth generation? And I'm sure there will be. But what has been so important as well is the people who we've brought into our business, the non-Barrows. And they have played a huge part in the success of the business during my time in the business. On the construction side, there are two individuals, Shanil Singh and Mike Makudu. He joined us straight out of school. He was a CARES graduate, and he's part of the system. And so he spent as long as I have in the business. He's also been a director, shareholder in the business, and he's grown with the business. And he's a great guy, and just someone who you want in your team. And the philosophy of the business is something that he's bought into. He's been down in Plet for the last 2.5 years. It's been difficult getting him back from Plet. And
sure.
he's been the person responsible for making it all work at Plet. And we're very proud of our association with him. On the Barrow property side, I've been incredibly fortunate to have Mark Ullman in the business with us for the last 12 years.
Another golfer that I know from Country Club.
Another good golfer. He was originally at Melrose Arch with Amdec, yes. And I met him first when we did our office development there. And I'd always harbored hopes of getting Mark across into our business. Okay. But it was a number of years after that development that he approached us and said he would be interested in joining. And Mark's he's a real property person. He's a really good guy. Absolutely. Yeah. And I've loved having him part of the team. And I've learned from him. He's a great sounding board. And he's just someone who you want in your corner. So very proud of the relationship we've developed with him. Shanil Singh, I would say, is the top building contractor in the country. And we all know of Tricult and Tim Klook and what he's achieved in Johannesburg with all his residential apartment developments. Tim Klook doesn't move without Shanil Singh. And all of his recent developments have been through Barrow Construction. And it's testimony to Shanil, and it's also testimony to Barrow Construction. And Tim knows when he goes into a new development that he's going to be looked after by Barrow Construction. We've just been awarded a new job, which is a JV between Tricult and Growth Point in Sandton, a big apartment development. And we're very proud of the fact that we were awarded that job. It had to go out to another party on tender, and we managed to win that one. And this job, it's the biggest job we've ever been involved in. And we're gonna make Tim proud.
Now tell me, your kids and your family and your boys and your daughters, do you see them getting involved in the business?
Yeah, Norman, it might happen. It's not planned, and we'll see how it goes. But again, I've been so fortunate in life. My wife Ailsa has been incredibly supportive, is a great soulmate, and has been a huge influence on my life, and I'm hugely appreciative for that. But our 3 children are all overseas at the moment. Our daughter is just qualified as a chartered accountant, and she's in London. Our 2 sons, one went to college in the US and was a squash player, but he's now working in real estate. He's with Savills in New York, and he's loving it, and he's lapping it up. And I think the property bug has caught him, so I see him remaining in the industry. Whether he comes back and to what extent he gets involved in the business, time will tell. Our other son, Alex, he's currently doing his master's in real estate at Reading University, and he's going to be joining Shaftesbury Capital in London in September. Very excited about doing that. Tough joining the workspace, having been studying for a number of years. But he's also going to get into property, and I'm pleased that that's happening. That was never by design, but we'll see how they go, and whether they can play a part in the business in the future, time will tell.
We speak a lot about the youngsters going overseas and studying and just learning abroad. But the beauty about it is that we can always come back as a South African, and we're very fortunate that the Barrow Group were here with the generations, and they changed the landscape significantly. And you've been involved in many, many developments. But it'll be an amazing story to see your kids eventually come back and to carry on the legacy and the journey of the Barrow family and group.
Yeah, and equally, my cousins have got sons or daughters. Interestingly, my eldest cousin, John, he's got triplets, 3 girls.
3 girls.
They're now in their early 30s, and they've done incredibly well in their own way. So I doubt that they will join their business. But there are other budding 6th generation youngsters coming along.
We don't want to lose all of them. We'd like to see them come back and to carry on changing the landscape in South Africa. It'll be incredible. Also for the Barrows to have your family still involved.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm sure that'll happen.
Great. And you'll become the soundboard to them in the future.
Amazing how quickly that happens.
Well, yeah, you said it before, 30, 40 years, and then you pass the baton on, and then we've seen it. But it's incredible that you've continued to do that in such an amazing way and let it continue.
And I'm sure you getting to that kind of stage as well. One gets great satisfaction at this stage of our lives from teaching people and from developing young people. And it gives me a real kick when I identify young people. And it's not necessarily just in property. It's in any sphere. And if we can help influence and mold them and direct them, it's good. You get a good feeling about it, and it holds them in good stead.
It's been an amazing hour. It's been an amazing conversation. And, from the bottom of my heart, I can tell you that I've just learned so much more about the Paul Barrow that I thought I knew, and your company and your family. And this story has been incredible. So thank you again for sharing that with us. It's been wonderful. I'm not sure if I've missed out on anything, but it's been really an enlightening hour of discussion. And thank you for joining us here and sharing that with us. And I think anyone that has listened will listen to the show can really learn from how a family is stuck together, developed something far greater than just 1 or 2 generations, and it's testament to you. And congratulations, and you can be proud of that.
Thanks, Norm. I appreciate that, and thank you for all your support over the years. And we've done a lot of work together, and we look forward to doing a lot more with you. I've just got a small piece of Barrow memorabilia that I'd like to give you as a thank you.
Beautiful. It's amazing. Thank you so much. And I've got something for you. But listen, Paul, it's been amazing. And really, not many people share their whole family philosophy, value system, and how their journey has evolved. And just being part of it has been an absolute honor. Thank you.
Thanks, Norman.
I'm Norman Raad, and see you on the next one. And please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Cheers for now.